In this example, we will be building on top of our previous example. In the previous example, we saw that how we can create arrays of integers or primitive types and pass it to other functions or methods using pass by references. Here in this case, what we are going to do is we have to create primitive arrays which will contain other primitive arrays. Let's say, let's talk about an integer array, a primitive integer array, which is a 2D array. So in this case, we have one array which contains other sub-arrays which are again integers. So what if we want to pass the sub-arrays to other methods or the entire array to other methods? How we can achieve that? So let us see one simple use case where we will be having a primitive array of 2 dimension and we are going to find the minimum element. So in this case, each of the subarrays will be passed to a function or a method which will calculate its own minimum. And then the number of rows or the number of subarrays which are there, we will try to see all the minimums that we got from each of them individually and see which one was the smallest among them. So let us see how this gets done. So in this example, we have a class which contains a main method. We have started off by declaring one array of fundamental or primitive type, and each of the elements of that particular primitive type array is also primitive arrays of integer types. So this array has 3 elements and each of the elements themselves are primitive arrays of integers. Now, how to actually find the minimum of all these elements in this array? So we will basically begin by assigning the first element of the first sub array that we have here, which is 45, to the global minimum. Global minimum in the sense we are going to calculate the minimum of each of these sub arrays at the row level, and then we will see whether what is the minimum amongst all the minimums we got from each of these rows. That becomes the global minimum. So how we are going to achieve it? We will do that using this simple for loop, which actually takes into account the length of the array. So the length of the array is nothing but the number of sub arrays it contains, which is 3 in this case. Then once we are looping over each of these elements remember are array types themselves, and we pass these array types to find minimum method. So here again we are using pass by reference by passing this particular element. So first this element will be passed, then in the next iteration this element will be passed, and again in the third iteration this element will be passed. So this particular method is going to give us the minimum of each of these arrays that we see here. How we are going to do that? In the find minimum array, it is the same algorithm that we have used previously. So we assume that the first element in the array is the current minimum, and then we iterate over the entire array and we see if the current minimum is less than or greater than the current value. And if we see the current value is less than the current minimum, we assign the new minimum as the current value, and at the end of the looping we return that value to the caller. So here actually we print out the minimum value that is being returned by this particular method. So these are the row minimums, and then we check if the row minimum that we got is less than the global minimum. If that is the case, then the global minimum also gets assigned the same value as the row minimum. And in the end, we print out the global minimum, which is the smallest element in this entire 2D array. Now let us quickly run this and see how it is working. So we see there are 3 rows, and for each of these rows we have got the minimum element. So in the first row the minimum is 10, in the second row it is also 10, and in the third row it is 1. So now the minimum possible values across all 3 is 1. So the global minimum is 1.